All right. Well, everybody, we got the recording notice, so I think that means we are official. I just want to say thank you to everybody who could join us this morning for our technical assistance opportunity for the Safe Teen Assessment Center grant. My name is Holly Walland, and I'm the project manager with IDJC, helping to implement the assessment centers across the state of Idaho. We have Molly Barker-Cook with the National Assessment Center Association joining us this morning. And also we have Jason Stone, the COPS Division Administrator. And so basically we are just going to use this opportunity to chat with you all, answer any questions you may have as you prepare your solicitation response for the Safe Teen Assessment Center. Since we do have Molly Barker-Cook with us, we just want to be able to, if you have questions specific to the framework, the logic model, or the guiding principles, we kind of want to give those questions a little more priority while we have Molly with us. And then I just kind of really quickly want to go over some key dates that we'll have coming up as it relates to this grant. So today is May 9th. Thanks everybody for joining us. On May 27th at midnight, the grant applications are due. And for any of you that have specific questions that maybe don't get answered or addressed here today related to the solicitation, please don't hesitate to contact me outside of this. I can set up a call with you and we can go over any questions you have as it relates to the solicitation. Around June 10th, the week of June 10th, we will be going through the grant applications, reviewing them and doing grant award notifications. And then the grant funding will be distributed on July 1st. So that is just a little bit of a schedule of what's coming up with key milestones as it relates to this grant application. So with no further ado, we want to see if anybody has any questions. We have Molly with us, so we will open it up. Chelsea Newton is helping us host with this. So Chelsea, if you see any questions pop up in the chat, please let us know so we can get those answered. Do you have anything you want to say?
Hey, good morning, everyone.
Thanks. All right, Molly, do you want to say anything or?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Nice to see some familiar faces. For those of you, hi, Todd. Yeah, if you have questions, I'm here. I know a couple of you have reached out to either Holly or us directly at the NAC for some follow-up information or questions, but please, I'm here to be of assistance and help you through thinking as a community how this could apply locally, but also if you have questions about anything specific in the framework. So come with the questions.
All right, well, Molly, if until somebody asks one, I'll just pose some of the ones that have been coming into me. So maybe we could kind of talk about some of the stuff we've been hearing on our end. And one of the things is just, can you share with us how the NAC model, guiding framework, and all of that stuff, what it tells us about community service providers and how they would participate with assessment centers in terms of, equity and stuff like that? Because I know we have a couple of community service providers that have been really interested in this project. So if you could kind of speak to that and how that aligns with the framework, that would be awesome.
Yeah. So service providers are crucial to this model and the success of the assessment center. The purpose of the assessment center or a function of the assessment center is to make sure that young people and their families are connected to the right provider at the right time. So they are essentially, I think we talked about in the in-person sessions, they are the bridge. And so, that collaborative nature of an assessment center, those service providers have to be at the table, they have to be partners in order for that to be successful. Most of the time, or I would say the majority of the time, they, though, are not the entity running the assessment center. Because we want to make sure that there's no perceived or actual bias or conflict of interest on where those young people and their families are referred to. The service providers are partners with the assessment centers, but not running the assessment center. There's a couple of rare exceptions to that. We've seen some tribal communities where they are positioned differently, where the service provider, there is only one service provider in that community, so it really makes sense. We've got a rural community in Kansas that I can think of as the only other exception, and it is really because there's only one provider. And in that case, it's really a conversation around resource scarcity and what can we do to build that. So there's not a whole lot of exceptions to that, but there are a few examples. It's more often than not that the service providers are partners in the application and partners with the assessment centers. So I hope that helps clarify that.
So we are getting some questions in the chat, and thanks, Molly, so much for answering that. You articulated that beautifully and way better than I ever could have. So thank you for that.
I can also actually, I'll put it in the chat right here. We have a publication that really talks about this. And why we hold such a strong position on, service providers not being the operators of assessment centers. So this is a link to an article that's called The Benefit of Neutrality that is on our website that maybe can help articulate some of that as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Yep.
So we are going to go down. There is a question from Jay O'Brien with Elmore County. Is there a length of time that we are required to use for our grant data? Do we go back 1 year, 2 years, 5? Following up on that, are there a specific sources we are not allowed to use for this grant proposal? So thanks so much for a question. This is a great one. I would say, depending on what access you have to the data, we have been sharing some, I know that some counties have been going back for the last 2 fiscal years. So I think at least 1 to 2 fiscal years is a good amount of time. Is there anything you'd add to that, Jason?
No, I guess I would just say include the data that's going to support your claim and justify the need. So if you have access to 2 years data, great. If you have access to a little bit more, that's probably ideal. You certainly wouldn't need to go beyond the 5 years. I think that would be kind of immaterial at that point. So thanks for the question. A couple years of data to demonstrate the need will meet the grant needs.
Thanks. And is there anything you can see following up that are specific sources they're not allowed to use for the grant proposal?
Give me some specifics of what you have in mind, the reason for the question.
Oh, well, all right. If you can give us a little bit more specific, Jay O'Brien, about any specific sources here in your question that you're referencing, we can answer that a little bit better. Feel free to unmute yourself as well. All right, well, we will follow up on this question, and we can add something to the chat here a little bit later if we get some clarity on that. Todd, your question is IDJC giving preference to tier 2 over tier 1 proposed assessment centers. And I believe we don't have any preference that we are providing for tier 1 or tier 2. We just want, it's just imperative that applicants designate which tier their center is going to use. That's a critical part of it. Just identifying what tier you're going to use and using your application to support that election for tier 1 or 2 tier is what we're looking for.
So I got another question that's kind of on that. We've worked with Charlie Health quite a bit, and when we look at how the YES program is working with Liberty, so a lot of those assessments, the CDAs, can be done online or over the internet. And so for a tier 2 assessment center, Molly's probably gonna like strangle me because she's talking about this. So it seems to me like in our area, a lot of the clinical assessments can be done virtually, if that makes sense. So with that, and Molly's kind of doing me like, hey, there's like gray area between tier 1, tier 2. But if you were creating MOUs with like Charlie Health that does theirs online or over the internet, telehealth, is that completely tier 2, or are we still at that tier 1.4? My question.
Todd, so I'll jump in and just kind of give a little bit of insight to that. I would say it depends on what that relationship is. When you and I talked, are you after screening, let's say a kid flags in the screening process, right? And it's either flagging in for a behavioral health issue or flagging in for substance use or, some trauma flags. Are those providers then, are you providing that referral to the assessment providers and then it's a hands-off? Or is that, if that is coming back to you, I think what you would talk to me about is if it was kind of a contract for assessment and then the recommendations are coming back to you for you to facilitate then the connection to care, then I would consider that more of a tier 2. If you are passing that off to the assessment provider and they are taking it from there, I would consider that a tier 1.
Yeah.
The difference is, it's almost like who has that case management function, right? And so you're in the tier 2 example, if you are working with those providers to provide that assessment and then their recommendations and the outcome of that assessment is coming back to your staff and they are facilitating that case management, that's, I definitely would consider that. I definitely would consider that a tier 2. That also, in my opinion, alleviates that potential bias that we were talking about on the assessment side of things. If you're making that referral after screening and the assessment provider is taking it from there, then and you don't have any function in that ongoing case management role, then a tier 1.
So
does that help?
It does. So when you're looking at case management, we have a status offender coordinator that does that now in our intake and diversion unit. And so, like, define case management. I mean, is it like clinical case management or what we're doing here in our building, making sure they're following through with, whatever services are put in place or substance abuse treatment or their mental health treatment, making sure they're taking their meds, getting their med review, checking on them at school, checking on them at home, that type of stuff. Is that?
Yeah, so case management means a lot of different things depending on how you set your center up. But for me, it's really, it's who is responsible. So let's take the example of where those recommendations after the assessment are coming back to you, right? And you have a recommendation from a clinical assessment provider that says, this is what we're seeing as some of those underlying drivers. And these are our recommendations in terms of different treatment modalities for that young person. It's then your responsibility to ensure that that young person and family get connected to those services and supports. Whether or not that case management takes on more of a supervision role is going to depend on how you want to set up the center. But it's when we showed in that in-person training, like the hot and warm handoff, right? And checking in with families, making sure that those services are actually working and, accessible to them. That is the function of the assessment center that I'm referring to. The supervision piece of that, right? Are they required? Are we keeping them kind of on more informal supervision until they complete these requirements? That's completely up to you and how you structure your center. Does that make sense?
That's helpful, super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Molly, and thanks, Todd, for the good questions. We have a question from Paul, and the question is, do MOUs with partners need to be completed before May 27th? This process can take some time coordinating. Yes, Paul, you are absolutely right. That can take some time coordinating. So for the purpose of the application, you know, if you don't have all the MOUs and everything with the community partners and everybody involved, that is okay. We just like, if you have any that you can show, please include those. But if you just would include in your grant application, who are the community partners and stakeholders you want to form MOUs with, and just include that as part of your timeline in the implementation, that will suffice for that. All applicants are proposing to accept referrals to their program are required to have the letters of support indicating support for the services from the referral agencies. So those we will need, but if you don't have all the MOUs signed and completed, just let us know who you're going to partner with and how that will look and when you think that will happen in the implementation process. Did you add anything to that, Jason?
Nope, I think you covered it. So yeah, there's just that specification and project administration on the letters of support, but knowing the MOUs are taking a little bit of time to build up the collaborations, just indicate pretty clearly that they're well on their way and the status where they're at, and that will be enough for consideration.
Thanks, Jason. Does anybody have any other questions that we can pose with Molly while we've got her? I know, Molly, one thing that did come up was just some questions around how people can, I think in the framework, it was critical intervention mapping and how communities can kind of do some of that as they're preparing for this work.
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways, and I know, Jason, you have more of the landscape of what's already been done, you know, in terms of councils and coalitions on some of the stuff. They're called a couple different things, right? So sequential intercept mapping, critical intervention mapping, we call it assessment center intervention mapping, you know, however you want to frame it, but it's really analyzing your data and kind of pairing that quantitative analysis with a qualitative analysis, right? Interviewing people, really getting a better sense of how are young people interacting and moving through systems, and where does an opportunity present itself for the assessment center to really service that off ramp to the justice system. We only know that by looking at data. So you can you can work through that process of data analysis with your own communities. If you've been through sequential intercept mapping, if you have coalitions that already do this work, the NAC certainly helps communities with community critical intervention mapping. There are a number of other agencies or kind of TA entities that will do that too. I think PRA is one of them. Gosh, that's I think SAMHSA might help out with a couple of the sequential intercept mapping. So if you don't have the capacity to do it locally, you can certainly reach out to us. You can reach out to some of those other entities to help you do that. But I know, and Jason, again, you can kind of speak more to what kind of coalitions or communities, groups have already been through some of that and utilizing that data to inform that target population.
Thanks, Molly. And Todd, we're going to get to your question next, but just building off of what Molly said for any critical intervention mapping, keep in mind as part of the grant application that successful grantees will have up to 5 hours of TA with the NAC every month for the contract year. So keep that in mind as you think about doing some of this, that you will have ongoing support with Molly and the NAC to just use their expertise and leverage the framework as you not just write your applications, but as you get into the implementation of these grants. So just wanted to add that. But Todd, go ahead and ask your question. Thanks so much for your participation.
Well, sorry.
Great questions.
I guess my first question, and it might be in the grant guidelines, but I couldn't remember as I read through a little while ago, but the monies it's not a reimbursement. It'll come in July 1st. Is that my understand? Is that correct? To the county, or will it be on a reimbursement type schedule?
Yeah, thanks. Excellent question. So this is relatively new, and we know that since we're starting up some new centers and some new resources and collaborations with that within Idaho, your grant application can request seed money, and then it'll probably start rolling structurally into like a reimbursement quarterly type of, hey, we needed X amount of dollars, 10%, 15%, what have you, to get this thing started up. We needed to get these things done, these rent agreements signed. We need that front to open the door. And then after that, it'll probably be, if you're hiring staff, like a quarterly reimbursement base. So it's both, Todd. We know that we're going to probably put some pennies in those awardees' bank to get started. And then quarterly, as those financial reports and progress reports come in to Holly, then it'll probably start looking a little bit more like, okay, we can, these things are anticipated and they can kind of be the reimbursement based or what have you. So we're open to just about anything, knowing that this is a brand new and it's kind of contrary to the way that the state has done grants before, where it's all kind of reimbursement based. So does that?
That was one of my concerns, because it's like,
Yep.
We got the budget year coming up and gotta figure that out. So then I had another question. So when you look at getting the grant out by May 27th with architectural plans and costs and things like that, what are the expectations for like architectural drawings, where it's like we're like 20 days out?
Yeah, so perfectly allowable, and the state recognizes that with the environment we find ourselves in now, that those things are going to be delayed. So just some level of communication with our department, like recognize that whether you're going to be refurbishing or rental agreement or building, those things are going to take time, and certainly are all allowable. So just keep us informed. I think certain pockets of the state will be a little quicker than others, but just keep in communication with Holly on that. So if that's 30 days, Todd, that's 30 days. If it's 60 days, it's 60 days. We want to see some marginal movement by 90 days, but we'll certainly understand that if you're like, hey, we've got this set, it's bid, here's some drawings, here's the anticipated costs, that will be fine with us.
But I guess that was my question, is if we needed like the certified architectural plans for the request or proposal. But I guess at this point, you just got to kind of do the best. I mean, we've got an idea and an idea of costs and can probably show that, but they're not going to be like.
Yeah, I would just use, justifiable expenses and reasonable. And I think that that's the best that you can do. I know that contractors and subcontractors are hard to find right now, and hard to get to, immediately at your door. So we understand those things.
Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Great questions.
I'll try not to come up with any more.
No, please do. I think it's helping with the conversation. So thank you.
And if there aren't additional questions, I'll try to jump back. I'm assuming the question above was not about sustainability, but was about data. And so are there any resources that you couldn't use? Absolutely not. Whatever data is there that's going to justify your need, and your justification for the project is absolutely outstanding with us. There's some common data elements from the Supreme Court and through the department that we would probably be anticipating to see, but whatever you have outside of that is outstanding. The second point, when we were talking about sequential intercept mapping and mapping, Holly alluded that that would certainly be an allowable expense and probably a great use of Molly's time if you're successfully awarded and you have that limited technical assistance time with her. But I would also encourage you to remember that the Idaho Behavioral Health Council is trying to really ramp up some sequential intercept mapping across the state as part of that behavioral health work. Laura Keel has been an outstanding partner. I know that they've done some planning. I know it's been very limited in the adolescent and the juvenile world. But if you have a priority and you think it would be, your area would be immediately impacted, then certainly don't hesitate to reach out to both the two of us, and we can connect you with Jason, Dia, and Laura, or directly to them. But those are available resources. And that, I would just say, use the historical information that you guys have done to identify needs and gaps in your communities. I think you all know exactly what those are, but through district juvenile justice councils, the state strategic planning, certainly the regional behavioral health boards, where we've done needs and gaps analysis for quite some time related to all the yes services. All those things would be allowable, but if you're identifying you need to get a little bit deeper than that, those two options would probably be your best resources.
Thanks, Jason.
I got another question, but it may be for Molly. So when you're looking at like a board of directors, is there I guess any advice you would give as far as size? Obviously you want members of the, your main stakeholders there, but how big, how small is too big, how big is too small? Is there a magic number? What advice can you give, Molly?
Yeah. My experience with both like a formal board of directors and or an advisory board is usually 15 to 20. I don't know that I would recommend a whole lot more than 20 because you have a hard time getting, that becomes more of like a coalition, right? Than kind of a directive board. In terms of, who's at the table, I think those system representatives that you're going to be working closely with are important to include on that board, as well as we talked about, young people and families who that center is actually going to be serving. I think are also crucial, your police department representative, courts, your child welfare, a school system rep. And then other than that, I think it's really good to get just some community organizations or community-based representatives to serve there. So yeah, I don't, 15 on the NAC board is 15 people. On the assessment center that I was running as a nonprofit in Colorado, I think we had a max of 20 on the board. So yeah, there's also a couple of resources. I know Board Source is one of them. That really gives, some guidelines on board of directors and how to structure bylaws, job descriptions of boards. So that's a good resource that you can go to get those kind of, best practices for boards.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll see if, while we take some more questions, I'll see if I can find a link to them and put it in the chat.
I guess from the department's perspective along those board questions, I know that a lot of times it's going to be some of the same folks. I guess I would just throw out there that from DJC's perspective, there'd be no expectation about having like quorum and minimums. I know sometimes we struggle on different boards and things to move forward with meaningful work when we don't have enough voices. So certainly I won't try to prescribe a magic number. I think Molly's giving you some pretty sound advice. If it's smaller than that, that's outstanding. But I would certainly be cautious about putting in there that any types of decisions, can't move forward unless there's quorums. And we're hoping that there's fully engaged, great participation. But at times, I think we've all sat on various work groups or committees that aren't able to move forward when we just don't have the composition in the seats to make a decision. So with that, I don't know if Holly or Molly has additional thoughts, but just something to throw out there.
How often are you, is your board's meeting, Molly?
So every, I have been a part of now 3 different nonprofits, 4 actually, and all of them have met monthly at least, or maybe sometimes every other month, we might cancel a meeting over the holidays or something like that, but mostly it's a monthly board meeting. It really depends, Todd. When we were talking the other week about the difference between like a formal governance board of directors and an advisory board, it depends on their function and because a formal board has fiduciary responsibility, has a lot more legal responsibility than an advisory board. Your advisory board likely, can meet maybe less often and take up, critical issues that the assessment center is seeing, that a formal board of directors has more responsibility, and depending, especially in the early stages of planning, you're likely going to want to involve them a lot more. So I would say, monthly, at least at the beginning.
Thanks.
Does anybody else have any questions? Feel free to type them, or we can have you unmute and ask us, but we are here and available. So feel free to ask any questions.
I just had a real quick follow-up question for clarification from Jason.
Sure.
So just to be clear, so the funds will be reimbursed. There's not going to be any upfront funding to start the projects and then so forth?
Yeah, no, sorry, Tim, I didn't articulate that very well. No, we are fine. And in your proposal, in your budget, you would just need to justify those expenses, but nothing will be coming in before July 1. So any costs that you guys incur before the project actually starts would be, in this case, at the expense of Elmore County. However, on day one, rather than reimbursement, if you're telling me you need $15,000 or something for infrastructure, for computers and those types of things to get your system set up, and for whatever fronting payroll and those kinds of things, or for refurbishing offices, we understand that. So just justify that within your budget, and then that will be something that could come to you day one or soon thereafter. And then you should get into the cyclical of, okay, then the rest is starting to be anticipated expenses, and then those would be more quarterly reimbursements after your progress reports and your budget narrative on your initial expenses. So upfront costs are allowable, but then only be allowable after July 1, based on what you prescribe for us in your grant application once it's approved.
Okay.
And
We would just need to specify, let's say we're asking for funds for assessments, then we would need to justify that in the application. And then if we were approved for it, then we would get those funds upfront initial for the startup. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
And just a little bug in everybody's ear, if you have any questions specific to budgets and what's allowable as you develop your budget response to this, feel free to get in touch with me directly. I can always help review any of those and help answer any questions about specific expenditures and what this grant allows.
So Jason, you talked about the sequential intercept mapping. So is that something might be available before like July 1st, or is that something that we would, I guess I'm trying to understand. So you mentioned that we could get a hold of Jason Dye. Is that something we do on our own, or is that something the state's looking to provide as part of the project?
You know, that's an excellent question. And as far as their obligations, they're leading and sponsoring that initiative as one of the hundreds really coming through the Idaho Behavioral Health Council. I've had some preliminary conversations with Lauren, and she might be on. I know that we're interested in DJC and supporting that need wherever it is. I know that the director has obligated some costs. So it'd just be a matter of trying to choreograph all of that. I don't know. I can't speak because we haven't had these conversations if the Supreme Court already has the next several sites targeted and where that time frame might be. But if there's still an ongoing need, I know that that's something that they're extremely interested in continuing to do. So I can reach out to Jason or Laura if there's some follow-up. I believe that Bannock had an initial. I don't know how it looked, how much time was put towards the adolescent services versus the adult. But if there's still a need, Todd, we'd be glad to try to help you work with the courts and DJC sponsor some of that work.
Okay, so I attended that, and it was strictly for adults.
Okay.
As I sat in there, the thing that came to mind was like, wow, this would be fantastic for our community, for adolescents, if we could do it for the juveniles. So
Well, that will be a takeaway from us. Holly and I will reach out to both Laura and Jason and see as far as availability and when something like that could we could execute on something like that. So we'll get back to you.
And Jason,
Yes.
Yeah,
I
go-
apologize. I am on, I'm just videoless today, so I apologize. I did throw my email address into the chat. So Todd, if you want to email me, I was at that Bannock County Sim to talk about the IBHC work a little bit. And yes, it was completely focused on adults. We are still looking for a juvenile location. In terms of time frames, the last conversation, if we use PRA, the last conversation that I had was that they need at least 10 weeks to plan. So that is something to keep in mind in terms of that July date.
Thank you, Laura.
I had a question for Molly. This is Ashley with Upper Valley Child Advocacy Center. So in the assessment center grant, it talks about establishing an evaluation system towards the progress towards desired changes. And I know that you guys talked about a tracking system during the training that you used. Does that include that in as part of the tracking system, like an evaluation system in that tracking system, or is that something that you guys have come up with or we would have to come up with ourselves? Does that make sense, that question?
So let me just kind of say it back and then you can say if I understood you right. So what we have in, I think what are you asking the actual data entry system, or are you saying the kind of outcome framework and the measurement system?
Yeah, I kind of asking about both because like as a child advocacy center, I mean, it's very similar to what assessment
Yeah.
centers do.
Yep.
So it's making sense. A lot of it makes sense, but like our tracking system we have currently, I don't know if it really evaluates progress. I mean, it tracks like demographics, it tracks all those, those
Sure.
good things that way, but I just wonder if there's a system for evaluating progress in a child. Does that make sense?
Okay, so what I would recommend, if you already have an existing system, you definitely do not need to like get another system just for the assessment center population. I would and I can upload it in the chat too. There's the logic model that really talks about what are the long-term outcomes. And then the other thing that we have is an outcome measurement framework. So for example, if you're talking about long-term 12-month outcome is that young people are not either re-entering or entering at all into the justice or child welfare system, you would just want to integrate into your current system. How are you going to track that? Is that something that the justice system, you have an MOU, data sharing MOU that you could have access to that? Is that, a report that they send you every quarter of, the youth that were served 12 months ago, and that you just have, kind of a page or a function in your existing system where you can go in and report what that outcome is or what that data point is for that particular youth. There's a couple of things in the logic model that talk about youth and family feedback, right? Do youth report that they feel like they were supported, that their voices were heard? Same with caregivers. In the long-term evaluations, it's do they feel like they have more connection to community? A piece of the NAC support to assessment centers is we have all of those youth and family feedback forms developed for assessment centers that are part of the NAC. So with your award comes membership to the NAC. You would have access for us to customize and build for you those surveys for young people and their families. So that would be a function there that's already supported. So a long answer, Ashley, but I would say you can help and we can help you build in those measurement and those indicator points into your existing system. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Perfect. And then I think there were slides from the training, like as we're writing the grant and that portion, just kind of taking those and putting those in that's what we're going to evaluate. Those are outcome measurements, those types of things into the grant. And Jason, as long as we're kind of putting those things in the grant, we can figure out the details of what it looks like with NAC if we're awarded the money. Is that, am Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, that's absolute.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Great.
Ashley.
So Molly, building on Ashley's question, in talking to Jack Martin in Tennessee,
Las Vegas.
yeah, I talked to him in Tennessee
Oh, I thought.
initially.
Got it. Okay.
I started there, and yeah, he's from Vegas, but he talked to me about a database they use to collect data, intakes, log, that type of stuff. Do you guys use the same system he does? And
Every assessment center uses their own system. I believe what the Harbor uses is it Tyler?
that's what I thought he told me, yeah.
Yep, and so Josh Campbell, who was out with us at the in-person, also uses Tyler. There's so Apricot is another data system that a couple of our centers use. Civicor, I can put these in. Apricot, Tyler, Civicor, Ohio and Kansas have developed their own kind of statewide systems. I'll see if I can keep thinking about what others are using, but those are, it's really most of your large scale data entry systems can adapt, in their systems to the framework, but those are the common ones that are used. There's not a one database for assessment centers that kind of feed into the NAC.
Okay. And that's what I was just kind of looking for, is maybe some advice or direction on which is best. And
If you, as a county, if you're using something that you really like to work with, I wouldn't change. I don't know that I would say go out and get a whole new data system. I would reach out to your provider and see if they can maybe, make another kind of offshoot for the assessment center. But if you don't like the system that you're using, right, or if you want to kind of start fresh and have a blank slate, I would consider, a couple of those in the chat.
so I'll reach out to Jason, but I don't know that it would be the right platform based on our on an assessment center. So
Yep.
Are you developing a new one?
There's timely conversations. iJAWS 2.0 is vamping up, but it's certainly not going to be meeting anyone's needs right away. So technology and a data system would be an allowable expense. I don't know that iJAWS as it is certainly the what we want to be using, since the whole thought is to keep kids out of the formal system. So to be in the statewide formal data system doesn't make an awful lot of sense. But I'm hopeful that we could look at a long-term option, but for this initial year, an independent system for each of you is probably what we're going to need.
One of the benefits, I think, of using one of the three in the chat, and we actually have a director circle today, so I can ask them in the director circle what other databases they use. But one of the nice things is you could reach out to them and say, we know that you have other assessment centers as your clients. Can you kind of cut paste for us, and then we can make it our own, so that they're not reinventing the wheel. They know the function of an assessment center at least. So, something to consider. But I'll ask today, and then I'll send them to Holly, and she can send them to all of you if there's other options there.
Thanks, Molly.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, it'd be super helpful when you're trying to do data and evaluations and stuff.
Anybody else have any questions? We've got this thing booked for about an hour and a half, but if we don't need it, we can always end around 10. But I just want to make sure we have enough time to get everybody's questions or address any clarifications you may need with the grant. We just want to make sure that you have all the information and tools and resources you need to get a good application for this assessment center grant.
So I may have a question, it may not be relevant, but Jason, as we're looking from a district-wide collaboration standpoint, outlying counties may have equipment they need. We can write that all into one. Could they receive the funding to their county, or would it all run through Bannock? Does that make sense? Like, there's gonna be one grant application. Does there need to be one entity that's kind of receiving the funds and distributing them, or could we tailor it to where, Power County gets their funding? Does that make sense?
It does, and I'm trying not to give you a disappointing answer. So let's say, let me check into that, but plan on, like, if Bannock's the county, the host county, that it'd all need to be distributed to you guys and filtered out that way. But let me check with our fiscal folks, and Holly and I can follow up to see if you guys have some. There is some provisions in there about some sub-grantee kind of things. Those are allowable. So let me see if I can figure out a really prescriptive way, and then get back to you on, yep, you can do that. This is how you do that. And we can try to get that answered within the next day or two.
Okay, appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep.
And everyone, I am putting my phone number and email in the chat. So if any questions come up after this TA about the solicitation that I can help with, or I can just pick Molly's brain on, feel free to send me those. I can set up conference calls outside of this with anybody. But mostly I just want you all to know that I am a resource to help you with your applications.
So you can proofread mine? Like a pre-grading scale, Bill? No?
We'll be glad to help address any questions that you have.
Well, everyone, if there's no further questions or anything, I am going to just reiterate the timeline. The grant application is due by midnight on May 27th. We'll be doing some technical reviewing and grant scoring the week of June 3rd. The week of June 10th, we'll be doing grant award notifications, and the funds will be distributed according to what you've asked for in your plan on July 1. So again, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. We just want to help make your applications as successful and responsive as possible. But thank you all so much for being here. Thank you all for your questions and thinking about how these assessment centers will work in your communities. And thank you so much for Molly from the NAC for all your expertise and support. You have just been so wonderful to help us with this process, and we're so excited to have so many people interested and to bring this valuable resource to Idaho. So thanks so much, everybody.